Good afternoon, everyone. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Mead Simon, founder and owner of Mead Simon Chainmail Designs, and he is here to talk to us about everything chainmail. So all those burning questions you have about chainmail, I'm hoping Mead can answer them for us. So welcome to the show, Mead.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So we've been talking for a few minutes here before we started the show. Chainmail, I mean, it's such sort of seemingly, for someone like me who's not in that field, it's such a seemingly random sort of thing to get into. How does one get into chainmail?
For me, someone who's been in it for 35 years, it's still random. I was working at a Renaissance fair in the States, and one day a friend of mine, just out of the blue, she comes up to me and says, I need to teach you chainmail. And I went, okay. And I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever done. I hated it. At the time, everybody was making armor. And if they made a bracelet, it was a strip of armor on your wrist, and it was pretty much that ugly. And I don't know, there was something about the mathematics of it and the harmony and the beauty of it that just caught my attention. And I said, well, I know we can make something more beautiful. So I started making jewelry and fashion designs. And the next thing I knew, I was making more money at this than I was at my career. And I took the plunge, and 35 years later, I'm still laughing every year when I pay my taxes.
What was your career, if I can ask?
It's funny. I don't actually share that
Okay.
because it would come across as backbiting against that particular industry.
Okay. No, totally fair. Um, I was just picturing as like an accountant or something, and then chainmail is like totally, But so Renaissance Fair, and you mentioned when I first met. So for the audience here, I took one of your business cards. We met at the Highland Games,
Right.
the abbreviated version of the Highland Games that was held this year here in Victoria at the Craig Flower Manor. And you mentioned something about Chicago. So maybe if you just wanted to so Renaissance Fair, because I remember sort of seeing that on a Big Bang Theory episode one. So I'm wondering, do we call them Renaissance fairs here, like a medieval fair, or is that quite common in the States to have sort of Renaissance fairs?
It's a lot more common in the States. For it to be financially successful, you need a certain population base. So we had a Renaissance fair in Toronto for a few years. Unfortunately, just due to poor management, it went under. But really, the only places we could have them in Canada would be Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. They're the only ones with a large enough population. There was one north of Chicago that I was attending for years. And yeah, it was just a fun time. A farmer had sold his field and they built this Renaissance city on top of it.
Wow.
All these beautiful wooden buildings. I actually built my own shop there.
Wow.
And it was closed down 10 months out of the year and open for 2 months. And many of us would just live on site for those 2 months.
Wow.
And we would work the weekends, build our stock during the week, and camp out and have a great old time.
Wow. It almost sounds like the Society for Creative Anachronism, or sort of those medieval societies, the LARPing. Were you into that community at all, or is that overlap a little bit?
Surprisingly, no. I was never into the historical side of it. I always got into it because of the fantasy. I loved the fantasy literature, the fantasy movies, and the SCA, the Scadians, love the history. They don't really follow it all that well in some ways because the Renaissance fairs and the SCA people, they often look at the paintings of the old days and they use those as their guidelines for their outfits. But those outfits were painted in the wintertime in Northern Europe. They would not have worn those super heavy velvet cloaks in the summer.
Fair point.
So they kind of miss that side of it. And once the Renaissance fairs got more meticulous about following those costume regulations, I'm sorry, wearing heavy velvets in 40-degree weather in Chicago in the summer or in the desert of Arizona in the summer, I had no more interest in doing that. It wasn't fun anymore.
Well, and I'm wondering about walking around in a suit of chainmail or wearing armor and stuff too, like in that type of weather. Mm.
I wasn't into the armor side of it. Some people love it, and it's just not my thing. For me, what I loved about the chainmail was the beauty of it. You can see over my shoulder here
Yes.
the strong geometric pattern. Now, this is not traditional chainmail, but even the traditional armor had this beauty about it that I really admire. But I wasn't interested in making sure that it could stop a sword. I mean, if you have to stop a sword, you've got other issues going on.
Fair enough.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I was more interested in making it beautiful and comfortable.
Wow. And fast forwarding a bit through the questions here, beautiful and comfortable to the point where I understand that you make some of your work for production for film productions.
I do film production, TV, but again, if they want armor, I'll generally pass them on to a friend of mine.
Interesting.
If they want the fashion designs, then I'll work with their creative department and come up with pieces that are suitable for the characters. So it's always for me a question of understanding the look and the style that they're trying to generate.
So there's chainmail, just my understanding so far. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So chainmail, and then sort of an offshoot might be artistic chainmail, sort of of your own making.
Sure.
Yeah.
Chainmail for me is just fabric. It's a patch of fabric, and you can use it as armor, or you can use it more artistically. Like on my other side here, you'll notice the top. I'm using the color pattern in a traditional chainmail weave to create these diagonal lines. They would not have done that at the time in Europe. But in the Middle East, back in the day, they would have used two different color metals, bronze and steel, and they would have used really small rings to make the verses of the Quran in the armor itself.
Wow.
So that was quite remarkable.
Wow. How does one color chainmail?
It depends on the material. Most of my work is going to be aluminum. Unless you're British, then it's aluminium. And there's an electric paint process called anodizing.
Wow.
So it coats the aluminum with a really strong outer shell, which gives it the color.
And you,
It,
oh, sorry,
go
go
on.
ahead.
Well, if I'm using steel, I can do a heat treatment or various chemical treatments to get colors. I can also use titanium, which will get those really nice matte colors, very a wide variety of colors. Or I can use niobium, which will give far more vibrant rainbow colors. But that's more for the jewelry than the fashion design aspect.
Do you buy it? So you yourself, do you buy it pre-colored, or do you do some of that anodizing yourself? Or
I pretty much buy it pre-colored. I could do some of the electric coloring with the titanium or the niobium, or even the chemical work with the steel, but I can't do it as well as somebody that's dedicated their entire profession to it. So I'm far more eager to buy it from somebody who's really made that focus their study.
that way you can spend time on the art, putting together the beautiful pieces like there.
Exactly.
Where does that last question sort of on that piece, but sort of like where does one source that type of thing, and what's sort of the market for that? It's like a big box for like 10 pounds for a few bucks, or like you get it from Germany or Chile, or where does it come from?
Toronto.
Toronto. Wow.
I used to get it from Saskatoon, but then they moved their headquarters to Toronto. Um, I would say the main source for most of us that make it is the ringlord.com.
Theringlord.com.
The
Okay.
Ringlord, they're based out of Toronto, and they're not what I would call precision rings. They're I call them, fast and dirty. They do a lot of bulk work. And it's what I call good enough. For pieces like this or this one, I don't need precision. There are other websites. You can just do a search for jump rings. That's what the material is called.
Jumper. Okay.
And there's probably a dozen really good producers out there now. If I want really fine precision work, then there's actually a guy on Main Island, of all places, who does some of the best precision work I've ever seen.
Wow.
Here,
Wow.
I'll show you one piece here. I have my little box of toys here.
Oh, this is great.
So, you can see a piece like this
Wow.
where it's a very solid sphere. Now, you have to be within, I don't know, like 1/128th of an inch on each ring to get it to be this solid. So for a piece like that where there's a lot of structural integrity, precision is the name of the game.
Right. Interesting. But then like the less precise for say the top part of the piece behind you, it doesn't need to be to that degree of precision.
Not at all.
Interesting.
No, if it's a little bit off, it just hangs a little differently.
And that's artistic in itself, right? Sort of the
Exactly.
way to wear. Interesting. So let's talk fashion shows for a second, because I'm just thinking that there must be a whole market for this. Have you done any pieces for like sort of fashion companies, or had anything appear on a runway in Milan or something like that? Or
well, no runways in Europe. I used to do a number of fashion shows all over North America.
Wow.
Now, remember, I started back in the 80s. So at that time, there were only a handful of us who were making chainmail. And my partner and I were the only ones who were doing fashion designs. You had the big name fashion designers, Bob Mackie, Paco Rabanne, who were doing those pieces for Cher and Madonna, Tina Turner. But that was just a small part of their work. So my partner and I, we had a company called Chained Links, and we did a number of fashion shows around North America. When I moved to Canada, I kept doing the fashion shows, but I don't know, I didn't like the egotism involved. There was so much game playing, and I just decided it wasn't really where I wanted to spend my time. So my last fashion show was actually back around 2000 in Vancouver.
Wow. So since then, do you primarily sell at markets or through an online store, or
Both.
yeah?
I used to do only online for a few years, and I just hated it. I really value the in-person contact. I love meeting the people and talking with them. So I stopped selling online, must have been about 2005. Actually, it had to have been before that. So yeah, I actually took my website down about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I didn't see a loss of business. People kept contacting me. I made up the extra business in shows, and it just kept going.
Where do you, so we met at the Highland Games. What sort of other markets and stuff do you attend?
Well, these days, the only one that I've been attending, your hat says the local, which is in Bastion Square, downtown. So I used to sell at the Bastion Square Market when that was happening. Right. Because of COVID, it hasn't happened this year, but hopefully it'll happen next year. And then the first chance and last chance shows, Christmas shows up in Sydney. Wow. Those are the only live shows I've been doing these days.
Pre-pandemic too.
Pre-pandemic.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I quit all my other shows because they were either too expensive. Right. A lot of the Christmas shows and a lot of the shows in Victoria price themselves as if we're Vancouver.
Interesting.
And we're not. So charging $1,000 for a show, I expect an audience like Vancouver, and Victoria just doesn't have the numbers.
give me ideas for a future episode. I'll have to chat with some of the organizers of those shows and learn more about their rates and why they are what they are. But yeah, I think it's great that we have those shows. It gives such a great opportunity for exposure and for, new artists and up and coming artists to really get to know the public and get their business card out. And yeah,
Absolutely. And the reason I keep doing first chances and last chance is because the cost of the show is reasonable.
right,
I love the people there. I love the organizers, and they're not trying to gouge the artisans.
right,
And even as a new artist, you can't afford $1,000 for a show.
yeah,
There's a lot of shows that are $25 and $50, and those are great for the new artists.
absolutely.
So,
How do you choose what sort of pieces to bring? To Depends on the audience, or
it depends on the audience. For most shows, I will bring my bracelets. That's kind of like my sketchbook. I'll bring my necklaces, and I'll bring an assortment of large pieces. If I'm doing a larger show, like the one of a kind show, or the high end shows in Vancouver, I'll probably only bring my gold and silver bracelets and the large fashion designs. I'm not going to waste my time or my space with $20 bracelets because that's not why the people are there.
just to get an idea of sort of the prices for your product. So you said like a bracelet might be about $20. What does some of the larger pieces? What sort of price points are we looking at?
Well, a vest like this one starts at about 400, maybe 500.
Wow.
This one, I've got these. You can't really see it too well here, but they're a mirrored plexiglass that's been laser cut.
Hmm.
Those pieces start in the 2,000 to 3,000 range.
Wow.
So I basically go the larger pieces. They start at 150 for a simple chest piece, and they go up to 10,000.
Wow. And do you have a lot of repeat customers, returning
Oh yeah,
customers? Yeah.
oh yeah. Like I said, one of the reasons that I'm in the business is to meet people, and I've noticed over the years there's a certain type of clientele who they only seem to feel validated as a human being if they spend money. It's a very strange materialistic mindset that I just don't understand. And if I notice that they're of that mindset, I actually won't sell to them.
Hmm.
I'll talk to them instead.
Hmm.
And I've had a lot of people who have come to the booth and they'll take like a $500 shirt and say, "Yeah, I want this one." And I'll take it from them and I'll start talking. And I'll ask them how they're doing. I'll ask them where they're from. I'll ask them how their family is. And I'll get into a conversation, still holding the piece. And I won't sell it to them until they realize that I care for them as a human being, not as a walking wallet. And I've lost lots and lots of sales this way, but I've gained so many friends. And these are the people that come back year after year. And it doesn't matter if they buy anything, they're bringing their friends just to talk with me. I go out for dinner every summer with a few families from Seattle who I met this way. So, yeah, to me, it's all about the people.
You mentioned a little bit in our pre-conversation about sort of spirituality and business and how those two perhaps merge for you, or how you've chosen to merge those. We will for those listening, we will have a future conversation, I hope, with Mead about his spirituality in particular. But if you wanted to just maybe spend a couple minutes or so on sort of how your spirituality informs your business, if that's possible, just without, if it's possible to have a short conversation, otherwise, and take all the time you need. No rush, no pressure.
Well, a lot of people are in business just to make money, and that's fine. But that's not why I'm in business. I mean, I have to make a living, so I have to charge a living wage. But I'm not out to sell every bracelet I can. My my goal in life is to help people become more content with their own life, to become more aware of the spiritual nature of life. So I often tell people I'm not out to make a killing, I'm out to make a living. And as long as I can still pay the bills, as long as I have a roof over my head, I know I'm doing fine. I don't need to make more money every single day. It's not why I'm here. So for me, it's a very natural thing to place the conversations above the sales. I'm in a very fortunate position that way. I know a lot of people who have their businesses who are not in that position. But it's also the result of a lot of choices I've made. I don't have a cell phone. I can't afford it. Um, I don't live in a sprawling mansion. You know, my wife and my family and I, we live in military housing. So we have a small house. We're content. We don't need more. And I wish more business owners recognized that. You know, a lot of times people defend the slave wages that people are paid to work. And I don't understand that. If you can't pay your workers a living wage, why are you in business? So that's a bit about my spirituality there.
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate it. Sorry, it's hard to sort of get into it a little bit and then step out again. I really look forward to the deeper conversation about your spirituality at a future conversation. I think in November we talked about potentially, but stay tuned. But you mentioned too at the beginning that you have a son. Working with family. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that, and maybe I thought maybe it dovetails with this spiritual component to business and sort of a more ethical component to business, and sort of instilling those values in your children, and also exposing them to the business world. Has there been anything of that for you?
A lot, a lot of that. Um, I've had the wonderful bounty of having my son at the market many, many times. And I've watched over the years as he's become far more adept at talking with customers and not only answering their questions, but pulling out their interests, talking to them as people. And I often talk about looking at them as people and not walking wallets. And I think that's so important to validate their existence as a human being. Now, he's also very fortunate in that he's bilingual, French and English. So any of the people who speak French, he gets to talk with them. But he's also watched me over the years working very hard to develop my business. And he has seen me drop a lot of things to help customers who need something immediately. So he's seen this example of a very strong work ethic. And I've noticed that in his schoolwork. He's 16 right now, and he has the most admirable work ethic. And then earlier this year, he decided to make a website for me. He said, Papa, you need a web presence again. So if you go to my website, meadsimon.ca, that's all his design. It's still in progress in some areas, but I'm really impressed with the work ethic he has shown in developing it.
It's so special to be able to work alongside your children that way, and see them sort of blossom into adults who are capable of doing things like making a website. That's good.
Yeah, I've got no concerns for him getting a job.
Awesome.
He would be a great bounty to any company he works for. His work ethic truly astonishes me.
What's he interested in so far? Where do you see him going after high school?
Computers.
Computers.
He loves his computers.
There's a whole future there. I mean, I don't know. Computers
Yeah.
is sort of, yeah, is the future, I guess, for us. So, for better or for worse, we'll see. We'll see. But here we are on computers, and this, I got to say, Zoom throughout the pandemic, and I mean, I think it's going to carry on. I think Zoom is a great tool. So So thank you to those creators. Last question on sort of family and business, and without divulging your previous career, I'm just curious because as a Canadian, who studied history and politics and sort of Canada-US relations, I'm always fascinated, and I know many of us Canadians, sort of native-born Canadians, are aware of the fact that there are differences between our countries and our cultures. And for me, the work ethic, or the supposed sort of so-called American work ethic, really stands out. Sort of the enterprising spirit. So I'm just curious, growing up, did you have a model of sort of being self-employed or a strong work ethic, and sort of did you deviate from sort of your family's traditional type of work to go into an artistic profession?
Hmm. Well, my dad was a self-employed salesman. He was the ubiquitous middleman. So he would find companies and then sell their products to stores. So I watched him as a salesman my entire life. And there were many times where he would have me as a child on the road with him for a few days. So I got to see him in action.
Mhm.
My mother is an amazing painter. The painting on this side of the ballerina, she painted that when I was a child.
Wow.
And I had the incredible bounty of watching her try her hand at many different media until she settled on painting. So when I was in university, I had no interest in being an artist. It wasn't even on my radar,
Hmm.
but I liked trying my hand at different media. And when I found chainmail, it just clicked, and I've never put it down.
Wow.
I mean, if you told me 30 years ago that I'd still be doing this for a living, I would have laughed at you. No way.
Wow. And getting paid for it and well enough to live too.
And getting
Yeah.
paid for it. What an incredible blessing.
Wow.
So I had those two examples, the salesmanship on my father's side, the artistry on my mother's side, but then also the American work ethic, as you say. But the work ethic in the States is very self-centered. It's all about making as much as you can. And when I moved to Winnipeg, I first moved to Winnipeg when I was in Canada, and there it's all about community. Everything is about community. And that really touched my heart a lot more. I think it's called the heartland, not because it's just the geographic center, but because community is as deep as breathing there. You can't survive without community. So for me, whenever I would have employees, I always made sure they had a living wage, even if it came out of my wages. You saw me at the Highland Games. I had a friend helping me, and I told her how much I was going to pay her for the weekend, regardless of how much money I made, because I knew that she would need her living wage. I happened to make more, so I was happy. But um, I've never been one of those employers to take on employees that I cannot support. And there's just too many in the American business model that are like that.
Have you trained, just to stem from that question, have you trained anyone sort of like, if someone does work for you, are they sort of helping you on the sales and admin part of it, or filling orders, or have you trained some folks in chainmail art?
Yes to all of the above.
Oh.
My friend this weekend, she was just helping me as sales. Back when I was doing it in the States, I had a number of people working under me. When I first moved to Winnipeg, actually, I guess it was before then, I had a dozen people working under me full time.
Wow.
And we had 150 stores throughout the States carrying our work. And at that point, I was just a manager. I was no longer an artist. And that, again, is just not where my heart is at. So we all got together and talked about it. And I was able to set, I think, 8 of them up with their own companies. Um, And they each took some of those 150 stores. So they already had clientele. And these were people who were interested in continuing on. I had trained them all in the art of making chainmail. I helped them learn a little bit about the business that they weren't already aware of. Most of them already knew this stuff. Um, but it was really nice to be able to step back and make sure that those other people had the opportunity to make a living if they wanted.
Right. Um, Education and learning about chainmail. One of the questions I had was sort of what's the path to, is there sort of a formal path, or is there a certificate program or some kind of governing a membership organization around the world for chainmail artists, or perhaps more the traditional chainmail for armor side? I'm not sure, but
Well, it's funny. Okay, I'm going to read you the question that you sent me,
please do.
and I'm going to read it as I read it to my son earlier today. Is there a guild of chainmail artists?
Guild,
No.
yes.
No, there isn't.
Okay.
In North America? No. Is there a global guild? No. Are there courses? Yes, a lot of people have put on videos on YouTube. I've put up a number of videos because a lot of people ask me how I create the different weaves I've created over the years. So I'm very happy to share it. When I was traveling the States for 40 weeks a year, I would teach people the different weavings that I was creating back in the 80s everywhere I went. So we went from the 8 traditional weaves that people would use to almost 200.
Wow.
And I had created most of those weaves in a handful of years.
Wow.
And back at that time, the traditional model was being used. Somebody would be the master and they would have an apprentice who would become a journeyman, and it was crap. It was just egotism. These people didn't really know much more than anybody else. So I was just freely sharing the information. And at the Renaissance fairs, the other chainmail artists hated my work. And they said, oh, it's garbage. It's not going to stop a sword. Well, 30 years later, I'm still doing it, and many of them are still struggling to make armor.
Right.
And I've watched as the entire industry has shifted from armor focused to the jewelry focus. Is there a certification? No. Is there a designation for folks working with chainmail? Well, we call ourselves artists. So there's no international standard, but that also has had the problem in that there isn't generally an international standard of the names of the different weaves. And there's a few of us who've been trying to get some consistency in that. But without an international standard, it's just an art form that people love. We have a great time with it.
There's a part of me that loves the informal grassroots structure. But as you said, there's some logistical, I guess, drawbacks and sort of no standardization in terms of the names for all the weaves. I'm fascinated in, like, I love history, and when you mentioned 8 traditional weaves, I love how we can connect with history, with the past, here in the future. So when you're learning or these 8 traditional weaves, are these 8 traditional weaves that were sort of used for chainmail making for like hundreds of years?
Yes.
Wow.
For the most part.
Wow.
Let me see if I can move. Oh, here we go. Just a second. So here's another piece that I made. You can see the parallel lines. This would be a European style of armor. I've just done it on a spiral here with colors. But this is what they would have used for a traditional European armored shirt. And each ring in the center goes through 4 rings around it. So it's called a European 4-in-1. That's a standard. That's been around for a really, really long time. We're talking millennia.
Wow.
Now, if you can count to 3 instead of 2, then you can add 3 rings on each side, or 6-in-1. Ooh. If you can count to 4, European 8-in-1. Wow. To me, they're all the same pattern. You're just adding 3 or 4 instead of 2.
Right.
But they were considered 3 different weaves. As armor, it's very effective in dispersing the impact of a blow if a sword comes down and chops. If a sword slices, it's not that effective.
Interesting.
So they would have used this style instead, which is an Oriental pattern. So this would be the Oriental 4-in-1. Again, each central ring is connected to the four around it by spokes, like spokes on a wheel. If you shift it a little bit, then you get a hexagonal pattern, the Oriental 6-in-1. So now you've got 5 different weaves. The 3 European, Oriental 4, Oriental 6. If you take the Oriental 4 and do it only 3 rows wide, fold it, and stitch it up, you get the box pattern. Useless as armor, maybe nice for hemming a sleeve or something, but great for a necklace. And then there's a variation on that you can do called the Byzantine weave, which, as far as I understand, wasn't really developed until the 16th century. I may be wrong on that. I'm not a historian. It's never really interested me. I just kind of picked that one up over the years.
Oh.
And then the last one was the corduroy weave, where in the European weaves, all the rings are going uphill in one row, downhill in the next row, uphill, downhill. But you can actually switch it so that it goes uphill, then downhill, then uphill, then downhill in one row. And the alternate rows are flat. I don't have an example of it here, but that was a corduroy weave. And again, totally useless for armor, but it just looked neat.
Wow. That's 35 years of study right there, eh? That's amazing. What's kind of sort of winding down to the end of my questions here, tools. What sort of tools? So I'm picturing you working in my mind's eye. I have like you with different types of pliers. Are you in like a metal shop or pliers or drill press, or what kind of?
I wish I had my pliers with me. They're at the other end of the room. This is my entire workshop.
Wow.
A pair of gloves, fingerless gloves for my comfort, and 2 pairs of pliers. And then my studio, I have boxes stacked, fishing tackle boxes filled with different size rings. So if I have a 16 gauge wire with a 1/4 inch internal diameter, I have a fishing tackle box that says 16 1/4 on the end. And I think I've got 3 or 4 of those boxes with all the different colors of that size.
Have you noticed any, so over 35 years of working with such sort of precision, I would say, even if it's not that, you talked about the different degrees of precision, but more precise than perhaps what the average person does throughout their 8-hour working day. Have you noticed any different like ways, changes to your body, like your vision? You have good nearsighted? Are you very nearsighted? Or how about your hands too? How do you feel after all the plier work?
Well, first, stiff shoulders. So I'm regularly exercising. For your audience, if you ever want to avoid carpal tunnel, don't waste your time with surgery. It's horrific. Take your palm, reach over your shoulder as far as you can, and hold it for 10 seconds. If you feel pain in here, you're in danger of carpal tunnel. You should feel the stretching here.
Wow.
And just do that a dozen times a day. And you'll loosen your shoulders. You'll get rid of carpal tunnel.
Thank you.
My fingers. Oh my God, my fingers strong. I didn't realize it until the other day when my son brought back one of those weightlifting things. It's 2 handles with a big spring in the middle, and you just squeeze it. You know the thing I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So he left it on the table, and I picked it up. I didn't even think anything of it. I just went, and I did like 100 of those reps. And I'm going, well, this is really stupid. And I put it down. And then my wife picks it up, and she does like 5. And she's like, oh my God, this is tough. And my son picks it up. He's like, oh, I got 10. Oh my God. I'm going, oh no.
Wow.
So they gave it to me, and I'm like, I said another 100.
That's awesome. Wow. That's
So
cool.
yeah, fingers of steel.
Wow. Neat. Cool. Okay. Wow. Um, yeah, anything else? I have no more burning questions. Anything else to tell us about chainmail?
It's a fun art form. You know, right now you're seeing the fashion designs. You've probably seen the armor. You saw just now the little wall hanging. There we go. Nice little wall piece. But you can also do
Wow.
pictures. You can do paintings in chainmail.
Wow.
So, you know, Van Gogh's sunflowers. You can also do, okay, let's see if I can find this. There we go. You can also do pictures where you take the scales in different colors and use them as pixelation.
Wow.
It's an art form. The possibilities are endless. As long as you look at the world around you, look at nature, go to museums, study fashions, watch people walking, whatever you look at, you can find inspiration in your art, whether it's chainmail or painting or anything else.
Wow. Those
So
are words
it's an
to live
art
by.
form. Words to live by.
Even for us non-artists, I'll take that to heart. So, yeah. Well, thank you, Mead, for your time.
Thank you
Nice.
very much. I'm very happy to share this. It's a great honor to talk with you.
And I'm looking forward to folks being able to watch and learn, and perhaps have their curiosity piqued enough that if they're interested in making chainmail, they can get into this field, because I mean, what a niche field, and I mean, it's fantastic. So
And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's very meditative. Like any art form, once you get into it, it becomes a very peaceful way of life.
I do have one more question then. When you're
Okay.
working, do you have like some kind of like AC/DC on in the background, or are you like sort of quiet music, or just silence, or what do you do in the background when you're working?
Sounds like you froze there.
Okay, it's me here on my end. Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Now I
So
can.
last question. When you're working, do you have like music on in the background, or sort of is it quite quiet? Do you like to work in silence?
Both.
Both.
Sometimes I love the silence. I've learned to really value science, silence, value science too. I've learned to really value silence in my life. Um, you know, they often say that the most important part of the music is the silence between the notes. The most important part of chainmail is the space between the rings. But also, I will very often have Netflix on, and I'll listen to movies or TV shows, or I'll put on CBC and I'll listen to conversations. Podcasts are a great blessing right now. I find so often when I'm working, I like to listen to great conversations and to learn. And it's a great opportunity that I have.
Awesome. Well, thank you. You've added another great conversation for the internet here, for other folks who are doing different types of art to listen to. So, yeah.
I look forward to seeing what they create.